Deep in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, hidden from the world, sits a place designed to hold the absolute worst humanity has to offer. No windows, no human contact, 23 hours a day in a concrete box. This is ADX Florence, America's Supermax prison. Inside these walls are men who orchestrated some of the most horrific attacks on American soil. Terrorists who killed children, drug lords who ordered thousands murdered, a doctor who poisoned his own patients for pleasure. But here's what most people don't know. Even in the most secure prison in America, some of these men still found ways to run criminal empires, order murders from their cells, and manipulate the system. Today, you're going inside ADX Florence. You'll meet 9 of the most dangerous men ever imprisoned in the United States, and you'll discover why some of them might never get out alive. April 15th, 2013. Boylston Street, Boston. 2 pressure cooker bombs detonated near the marathon finish line within seconds of each other. 3 people dead, hundreds injured. An 8-year-old boy named Martin Richard blown apart while watching runners cross the line with his family. The city locked down. Millions of people trapped in their homes. The FBI released grainy surveillance footage of 2 men wearing backpacks. Brothers, Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. 3 days later, the brothers murdered MIT police officer Sean Collier in his patrol car. They carjacked a Mercedes SUV. The driver escaped and called police. A shootout erupted in Watertown. Tamerlan Tsarnaev died in the gunfight. Dzhokhar ran. 20,000 law enforcement officers searched door to door. Helicopters circled overhead. SWAT teams moved through neighborhoods. Then a homeowner noticed blood on his boat. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was hiding inside, wounded and bleeding out. They pulled him from that boat, barely alive. He'd written a message on the interior wall in his own blood. The U.S. government is killing our innocent civilians. He claimed the bombing was retribution for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The trial lasted months. Survivors testified. Crime scene photos showed body parts scattered across Boylston Street. Dzhokhar showed no emotion. The jury deliberated for 14 hours. Guilty on all 30 counts. The penalty phase began. His defense team argued he was just 19, that his older brother radicalized him, that he deserved life in prison, not death. The prosecution showed surveillance footage of Dzhokhar calmly placing his backpack bomb directly behind a group of children, then walking away, then the explosion, then 8-year-old Martin Richard dying on the sidewalk. The jury sentenced him to death. But here's what most people don't know. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has been on death row at ADX Florence for over a decade. He hasn't been executed. His appeals continue. His lawyers argue the trial was unfair because it took place in Boston, where emotions ran too high. In 2020, a federal appeals court actually vacated his death sentence. The Supreme Court reinstated it in 2022, but the execution date keeps getting delayed. Legal experts say he could remain in appeals for another 20 years, maybe longer. Inside ADX Florence, Dzhokhar spends 23 hours a day alone in a 7 by 12 foot concrete cell. No windows. 1 hour of recreation in a slightly larger concrete box. No contact with other inmates. No phone calls, except to lawyers. Letters are heavily censored. His family visits once every few months through reinforced glass. Former ADX inmates describe the isolation as psychological torture. Some have gone insane. Others have attempted suicide repeatedly. The Florence Project, a prisoners' rights group, documented over 30 suicide attempts in ADX's H unit, where Dzhokhar is housed. But Dzhokhar has adapted. Guards report he's compliant, polite. He reads extensively, studies mathematics, writes poetry. He's gained weight, grown a beard. He looks nothing like the scared 19-year-old they dragged from that boat. His case raises questions nobody wants to answer. If the death penalty exists, shouldn't it be carried out? Or has ADX Florence created something worse than death? A living tomb where men wait decades in solitary confinement for executions that may never come? The families of the bombing victims are divided. Some want him executed immediately. Others say keeping him buried alive in ADX is sufficient justice. A few have publicly forgiven him. Meanwhile, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev waits. 23 hours a day in his concrete cell. No sunlight, no human touch, no sounds except the ventilation system and the metallic clang of doors. And he's not alone in that waiting. Because just down the corridor sits another bomber, a man who attacked the World Trade Center 8 years before September 11th. A man whose plan was even more ambitious than Dzhokhar's. A man who wanted to topple both towers and kill 50,000 people in a single day. His name is Ramzi Yousef, and his story makes the Boston Marathon bombing look like a test run. February 26, 1993, 12:17 p.m. A yellow Ryder van sat in the underground parking garage beneath the North Tower of the World Trade Center, inside the cargo area. A 1,500-pound urea nitrate hydrogen gas enhanced device. The largest improvised explosive ever detonated on American soil up to that point. The driver walked away. 12 minutes later, the bomb exploded. The blast created a crater 5 stories deep and half a football field wide. It ripped through reinforced concrete like paper. 6 people died instantly. 1,000 were injured. Smoke filled the stairwells. 50,000 people trapped inside both towers. Pregnant women carried down 70 flights of stairs. People with heart conditions collapsing. Children separated from parents in the chaos. The evacuation took 11 hours. But the horror wasn't what happened. It was what was supposed to happen. Ramzi Yousef designed that bomb to topple the North Tower into the South Tower. Both buildings collapse. 50,000 dead. Maybe more. He wanted to create the single deadliest terrorist attack in human history. He almost succeeded. Investigators later determined the bomb was parked 15 feet from the exact structural column that would have brought the tower down. 15 feet. Yousef fled to Pakistan within hours of the explosion. He didn't stop. He kept building bombs. He tested new designs, improved his chemistry. He planted a bomb on Philippine Airlines Flight 434. It detonated at 35,000 feet, killed 1 passenger, blew a hole in the fuselage. The pilot barely managed to land. Yousef called it a test run. His real plan was called Bojinka. Simultaneously destroy 11 commercial airliners over the Pacific Ocean. 3,000 people dead in a single coordinated strike. He was mixing chemicals in a Manila apartment when a fire broke out. Neighbors called police. Yousef escaped out a window, but he left behind a laptop computer. The laptop contained everything: flight schedules, bomb designs, target lists, and another plan, a plot to assassinate Pope John Paul II during his upcoming visit to Manila, and another, crashing a plane into CIA headquarters. The FBI manhunt intensified. 2 years. Yousef moved between Pakistan, Afghanistan, Thailand, Malaysia. He used 17 different aliases. He had facial surgery to change his appearance. He bribed officials, disappeared into refugee camps. Then a Pakistani informant gave him up. Yousef was hiding in a guest house in Islamabad. FBI agents and Pakistani commandos hit the location at 3 a.m. They found Yousef asleep. He woke up with guns in his face. He didn't resist. He smiled. They flew him back to New York. During the flight, an FBI agent told Yousef to look out the window. The World Trade Center towers were still standing. Yousef stared at them. Then he said, "They wouldn't be if I had had enough money and explosives." The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors presented the laptop evidence, bomb-making manuals, Yousef's own writings, where he detailed his motivations. He claimed he was retaliating for American support of Israel, for the suffering of Palestinians. He showed no remorse, no empathy. When victims testified about their injuries, their trauma, their dead family members, Yousef took notes like a scientist observing an experiment. The jury convicted him on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison plus 240 years. He added, "You are not a soldier. You are a terrorist. You practice the politics of fear and the diplomacy of death." Yousef was sent to ADX Florence, H Unit, the same corridor where Dzhokhar Tsarnaev would arrive 20 years later. Inside ADX, Yousef became legendary among guards for his intelligence. He speaks 5 languages fluently. He has an engineering degree. He studies law, files his own appeals, represents himself in court hearings. He's written hundreds of pages of legal briefs, arguing his conviction was unjust. But here's what makes Yousef different from other ADX inmates. He's never shown any sign of breaking. 27 years in solitary confinement. Most men crack within 5 years. They hallucinate. They talk to themselves. They smear feces on walls. They attempt suicide. Not Yousef. Guards say he's calm, focused. He maintains a strict exercise routine in his cell. He reads constantly. He memorizes legal statutes. Some psychologists believe his complete lack of empathy, what would normally be considered a severe personality disorder, actually protects him from the psychological damage of isolation. He's become a symbol inside ADX, proof that the human mind can adapt to almost anything if it lacks the emotional capacity to suffer. But there's another side to this story, a side the prison doesn't advertise. Ramzi Yousef has communicated with other terrorists inside ADX. Despite the isolation protocols, despite the monitoring, messages get through, hidden in legal documents, encoded in seemingly innocent letters to family members. The FBI has intercepted some of these communications. They've never released the full details publicly. What are those messages about? Bomb designs? Tactical advice? Inspiration for future attacks? The government won't say. But they've kept Ramzi Yousef under special administrative measures, the highest level of communication restriction in the federal prison system, for over 2 decades. His appeals continue. His lawyers argue that solitary confinement for life constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, that no human being should be kept in a concrete box for 30 years, that even the worst criminals deserve some form of human contact. The courts keep denying his appeals, because if Ramzi Yousef ever gets transferred to a lower security prison, if he ever gets access to other inmates, to normal communication, to any opportunity at all, the FBI believes he would immediately begin planning another attack, even from behind bars, even under surveillance, because that's what he does. That's what he's always done. And he's not the only bomber in ADX Florence who refuses to quit. Down another corridor, in another concrete cell, sits a man who tried to blow up a plane using explosives hidden in his shoes. A man so dangerous that his failed attack changed airport security forever. His name is Reid, and his story proves that sometimes the most dangerous inmates aren't the ones who succeeded. December 22nd, 2001. American Airlines Flight 63 from Paris to Miami. 297 passengers and crew. 6 hours into the flight, a passenger tried to light a match. Flight attendant Hermes Moutardia approached him. She smelled sulfur. The man was Reid, 6'4", recently converted to Islam. He was trying to ignite explosives hidden in his sneakers. Reid struck another match. Moutardia grabbed his arm. He shoved her into a seat. She screamed. Passengers rushed the aisle. Reid was massive, strong, violent, determined. He fought like an animal. He bit one passenger's thumb to the bone. It took 5 men to hold him down. They found wires protruding from his shoes. The soles were packed with PTN and TTP, the same explosives used in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Enough to blow a hole in the fuselage. Enough to kill everyone on board. 2 fighter jets scrambled to escort the plane. It landed at Boston Logan International Airport. FBI agents boarded. Reid sat zip-tied to his seat, sweating, furious that his attack had failed. The investigation moved fast. Reid wasn't sophisticated like Ramzi Yousef. He was blunt, direct, almost childlike in his devotion to violence. British intelligence had been tracking him for months. They knew he'd trained in Afghanistan. They knew he'd met with al-Qaeda operatives. They suspected he was planning something, but they didn't know what or when. Reid's background explained everything and nothing. Born in London. Mixed race. Father was a career criminal. Mother struggled with addiction. Reid spent his youth in and out of juvenile detention. Petty theft. Burglary. He was violent, but not particularly smart. He converted to Islam in Feltham Young Offenders Institution. After his release, he became radicalized at Brixton Mosque in South London. This was ground zero for jihadi recruitment in the late 1990s. Reid met handlers. They saw potential, not intelligence, not skill, just pure fanatical commitment. Someone willing to die without hesitation. They sent him to Afghanistan, to training camps in the mountains. He learned how to build bombs, how to blend in, how to move through airports. Al-Qaeda gave him a mission: destroy a commercial airliner over the Atlantic Ocean. Reid nearly succeeded. Experts later testified that if his shoes had detonated, the plane would have disintegrated at 35,000 feet. No survivors, no wreckage recovery, just debris scattered across the ocean. But Reid made one critical mistake. The explosives were moisture sensitive, and it was raining in Paris when he boarded. His shoes got wet. The fuses wouldn't ignite properly. That's the only reason anyone survived. The trial was brief. Reid pled guilty to all 8 counts, including attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction. He gave a rambling statement in court about martyrdom and holy war. The judge interrupted him repeatedly. Reid shouted, "I am at war with your country." The judge sentenced him to life in prison, without parole plus 110 years, then said, "The way you have conducted yourself, you will never get a chance to speak again, and that is an appropriate punishment." Reid was sent directly to ADX Florence. No stops, no general population, straight to H Unit, the same wing as Ramzi Yousef and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. But Richard Reid is different from the other terrorists in ADX. He's not brilliant. He's not calculating. He's not adapting to isolation. He's deteriorating. Guards report that Reid talks to himself constantly. He bangs his head against the concrete walls. He refuses to shower for weeks at a time. He screams at night, sometimes in English, sometimes in Arabic, sometimes in languages that don't exist. Psychiatrists have evaluated him multiple times. Their reports remain sealed, but former ADX staff have described Reid as having severe mental health issues exacerbated by solitary confinement. Some believe he's experiencing psychotic breaks. Others think he's malingering, faking insanity to get transferred to a psychiatric facility with less restrictive conditions. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Reid was never stable. 23 years in solitary confinement has pushed him over the edge he was already standing on. But here's what keeps him in ADX despite his mental state. In 2009, Reid was caught trying to pass messages to other inmates using the prison chapel. He'd written coded letters discussing martyrdom operations and continuing the struggle. Prison officials shut down his chapel access permanently. In 2015, He was found with a homemade weapon, a sharpened piece of metal hidden in his cell. Where he got it, how he made it, nobody knows. ADX is designed to prevent exactly this kind of thing. But inmates find ways. His lawyers continue filing appeals. They argue that keeping a mentally ill man in solitary confinement for decades violates the Eighth Amendment. They present psychiatric evidence. They cite international human rights standards. The courts deny every appeal because Richard Reid's mental illness doesn't change what he tried to do, doesn't change what he would do again if given the opportunity. Even now, barely functional, talking to invisible enemies, he remains committed to his cause. And that's the paradox of ADX Florence. It breaks men, destroys their sanity, but it can't destroy their ideology, can't erase their willingness to kill. So they stay locked in their concrete boxes, losing their minds, but still dangerous. Reid's failed attack changed the world. Every person who's ever taken their shoes off at airport security is living in the shadow of what he tried to do. That's his legacy. Not martyrdom, not glory, just an inconvenience. A reminder that even failed terrorists can reshape society. But while Reid deteriorates in his cell, talking to ghosts and banging his head against walls, another inmate in ADX Florence is thriving. A man who controlled a criminal empire worth billions. A man who escaped from maximum security prisons twice. A man whose legend grew so large that they made Netflix shows about him. His name is Joaquín Guzmán Lora. The world knows him as El Chapo, and his story proves that some men are harder to contain than others. July 11th, 2015. Altiplano Maximum Security Prison, Mexico. The most secure prison in the country. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán sat on his bed in cell 20. He took off his shoes. He walked into his shower area. Security cameras tracked his every movement. Then he disappeared. Guards reviewed the footage. El Chapo had stepped into the shower. He never stepped out. They rushed to his cell. Empty. They checked the shower. A hole, 20 inches by 20 inches, cut perfectly into the floor. A ladder descended into darkness. Below the prison, his engineers had built a tunnel, 1 mile long, 30 feet underground, lit with fluorescent lights, ventilated. A motorcycle on rails to move through it faster. The tunnel took a year to build, cost millions. Nobody noticed. Nobody heard. The most wanted drug lord in the world had vanished again. This was El Chapo's second escape from maximum security. The first happened in 2001. He'd been serving a 20-year sentence. Guards smuggled him out in a laundry cart. He paid them $50 million. He walked out the front gate, hidden under dirty sheets. For 13 years after that first escape, El Chapo ran the Sinaloa cartel, the largest drug trafficking organization in the Western Hemisphere. He moved cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, marijuana, billions of dollars, thousands of tons. He controlled smuggling routes from Colombia through Mexico into the United States. He bribed police, judges, politicians, generals, anyone with a price tag. The violence was industrial in scale. The Sinaloa cartel didn't just kill rivals. They sent messages. Bodies hung from bridges. Severed heads delivered in ice coolers. Mass graves discovered in the desert. Conservative estimates put the death toll in the tens of thousands. Some believe it's higher. El Chapo became a folk hero in parts of Mexico. They wrote songs about him, narco-corridos, celebrating his cunning and power. They sold El Chapo merchandise, T-shirts, action figures. Some poor communities built shrines to him because he donated money for schools and churches. He was Robin Hood with a body count. The Mexican government captured him in 2014, February 22nd, a joint operation with the DEA. They tracked him to a hotel in Mazatlan, kicked in the door at dawn, found him in bed with his wife. He didn't resist. Didn't reach for a weapon. The legend surrendered in his underwear. They sent him to Altiplano, the escape-proof prison. 24-hour surveillance. Guards rotated every 12 hours to prevent bribery. No windows. No contact with other inmates. Every security measure imaginable. It wasn't enough. The tunnel escape made international headlines. The Mexican government looked incompetent, corrupt, complicit. They launched a massive manhunt. Military checkpoints. Informant networks. Surveillance drones. 6 months later, they found him hiding in Los Mochis. Another dawn raid. This time he ran. Escaped through a drainage tunnel. The Marines chased him through the sewers. They caught him stealing a car. The Mexican government had enough. They extradited him to the United States. January 19, 2017, he landed in New York facing 17 counts. Drug trafficking, murder conspiracy, firearms violations, money laundering. The trial started in November 2018. For 3 months, the prosecution presented witness after witness. Former cartel members who'd flipped, law enforcement agents, financial experts. They detailed El Chapo's empire, the bribes, the murders, the tunnels, the submarines. Yes, submarines, custom-built to move cocaine underwater from South America to Mexico. The defense tried to argue El Chapo was just a scapegoat, that the real leader of the Sinaloa cartel was Ismael El Zambada, that prosecutors needed a celebrity defendant. The jury didn't buy it. The most damaging testimony came from El Chapo's own lieutenants, men who'd worked beside him for decades. They described his paranoia, how he changed phones every 3 days, how he communicated through encrypted messages that self-deleted, how he had his IT guy build a system called FlexiSpy that let him monitor his wife, his mistresses, his sicarios. They testified about the murders he ordered. A 16-year-old girl and her mother killed because the girl disrespected him. Rivals tortured for hours before being burned alive. Informants fed to tigers he kept as pets. The prosecution showed the jury photos, surveillance footage, intercepted messages where El Chapo casually discussed killing people like ordering dinner. His mistress testified, Lucero Sanchez Lopez, a Mexican legislator who'd had an affair with him. She described his life on the run, the plastic surgery to change his appearance, the safe houses scattered across Mexico, how he'd escape through hidden tunnels whenever authorities got close. She cried on the stand. El Chapo showed no emotion. The jury deliberated for 6 days. Guilty on all 10 counts. The judge set sentencing for June. During the sentencing hearing, El Chapo finally spoke. He complained about his treatment in Manhattan's Metropolitan Correctional Center. 23-hour lockdown. No sunlight. Psychological torture. He called it. He claimed the trial was rigged, that the U.S. government just wanted to destroy him. The judge sentenced him to life in prison plus 30 years, then added, "You will spend the rest of your days in a prison from which there is no escape." Federal marshals led him away. El Chapo looked back once, then disappeared through the door. They transported him to ADX Florence. July 17, 2019. Heavy security. Helicopters. Armored vehicles. They weren't taking chances. The man who'd escaped 2 maximum security prisons was now in the only prison in America that had never had an escape. El Chapo entered H Unit in shackles, the same corridor housing Ramzi Yousef, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, Richard Reid. He was assigned cell 13, 7 by 12 feet, concrete walls, no windows, 1 hour of recreation per day in a concrete box slightly larger than his cell. Prison officials implemented special administrative measures. No contact with other inmates. No phone calls except to his lawyers. Letters heavily censored and limited. 2 visits per month maximum through reinforced glass. They weren't going to let him run his cartel from inside. But here's what nobody talks about. El Chapo is 67 years old now. He has diabetes, high blood pressure. His health is deteriorating. ADX Florence doesn't have extensive medical facilities. Inmates with serious conditions sometimes get transferred to prison hospitals for treatment. His lawyers argue he should be moved on humanitarian grounds, that keeping an elderly sick man in solitary confinement violates his human rights. The government refuses. They believe, maybe correctly, that any transfer, any moment outside ADX's control is an escape opportunity because El Chapo still has resources. The Sinaloa cartel still exists. It's fractured now. His sons run parts of it. Other factions fight for control. But the organization is worth billions. Those billions could buy anything, bribe anyone, build any tunnel. So El Chapo sits in his cell, 23 hours a day. No sunlight, no human contact, beyond guards, passing food through a slot. The man who built a drug empire, who escaped twice, who became a legend, reduced to a number in America's most secure prison. His story raises questions about justice, about revenge, about what happens when you lock someone away so completely that they cease to exist. Is this punishment? Is this torture? Is there a difference? Down the corridor from El Chapo sits another man who built an empire. Not drugs, not terrorism, street violence organized into something bigger. A man who turned a Chicago street gang into a nationwide criminal organization. A man who still runs that organization from his cell despite 25 years in isolation. His name is Larry Hoover, and his story proves that some prisoners remain more powerful inside than most people are outside. Larry Hoover has been in federal prison since 1997, 27 years. 23 of those in solitary confinement at ADX Florence. He's 74 years old. He hasn't touched another human being in over 2 decades. He eats alone, exercises alone, exists alone in a 7-by-12-foot concrete cell, and he still runs the Gangster Disciples. The organization has 30,000 members across the United States, active in 35 states, annual revenue estimated at $100 million. Drug trafficking, extortion, murder for hire, money laundering, all of it coordinated through a command structure that flows back to Cell 30 in ADX Florence's H Unit. How is this possible? How does a man in the most secure prison in America, under the most restrictive communication protocols ever devised, continue to control a nationwide criminal organization? The answer is both simple and terrifying. Larry Hoover is a genius. He started the Gangster Disciples in 1968. He was 18 years old. Chicago's South Side. The organization began as a merger between 2 street gangs, the Black Gangster Disciple Nation and the Supreme Gangsters. Hoover became chairman. He brought structure, hierarchy, rules. He transformed a street gang into something resembling a corporation. The Gangster Disciples had ranks, from foot soldiers to governors to regents. They had written bylaws, a constitution. Members had to memorize organizational history and principles. Hoover called it growth and development. He presented the organization as a community improvement group. They did charity work, gave out Thanksgiving turkeys, held peaceful protests. Behind that facade, the Gangster Disciples sold drugs, cocaine, heroin. They controlled entire neighborhoods. Enforcers collected street taxes from businesses. Anyone who refused paid with violence. Rivals were eliminated. Witnesses intimidated. Police bribed. Politicians bought. By the 1990s, Hoover was already in prison, serving a murder sentence from 1973. He'd been convicted of ordering the death of a drug dealer named William Young, shot multiple times and left in an alley. Hoover got 150 to 200 years, but that didn't stop him. From Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois, he continued running the organization. He used visitors, lawyers, corrupt guards. He encoded messages in seemingly innocent letters. He developed an entire vocabulary of code words that law enforcement took years to crack. Literature meant cocaine. Job meant murder. Promotion meant increasing territory. The feds watched him for years. Wiretaps, surveillance, informants. They documented everything. In 1995, they indicted Hoover and 38 other gangster disciples' leadership on federal conspiracy charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded phone calls where Hoover ordered hits. Financial records showing millions in drug proceeds. Testimony from former members. The trial revealed the scope of his organization. Witnesses described how Hoover controlled operations from prison through a network of visitors who'd memorize his instructions and relay them to street commanders. How he'd conduct board meetings during authorized phone calls using coded language. How he'd hidden messages inside children's drawings that his family would bring during visits. The prosecution presented proof that Hoover had ordered at least 6 murders from behind bars. One victim was a 15-year-old boy suspected of cooperating with police. Another was a rival gang leader shot 35 times in broad daylight. Hoover showed no reaction during testimony, no remorse, no emotion. The jury convicted him on all counts: continuing criminal enterprise, drug conspiracy, extortion. The judge sentenced him to 6 life sentences plus 200 years, then added, "You have shown yourself to be a danger to society regardless of where you are confined." They sent him to ADX Florence in 1997. The Bureau of Prisons thought isolation would finally break his control. They implemented special administrative measures. No phone calls, extremely limited mail, visits reduced to immediate family only, once per month, through glass. Every word monitored, every letter censored. It didn't work. Within months, law enforcement discovered that Hoover was still communicating with the organization. His lawyers were acting as messengers. They'd visit under attorney-client privilege, which couldn't be monitored, and relay instructions. The feds caught on, prosecuted several attorneys. Hoover's legal visits were restricted to approved lawyers only, with monitoring. He adapted, started using his son. Larry Hoover Jr. would visit, speak in coded language that sounded like normal family conversation. "How's Uncle doing?" meant, "What's the status in the West Side Territory?" "Tell cousin about the reunion" meant, "Execute the planned operation." The conversations were recorded but seemed innocent. In 2016, federal prosecutors filed new charges against Larry Hoover Jr. and other Gangster Disciples members. The indictment alleged they'd been facilitating Larry Hoover's continued control of the organization through coded prison visits and phone calls. The evidence included thousands of hours of recorded conversations. Analysts had finally cracked the latest code system. One intercepted message from 2015 showed Hoover ordering a violation, internal gang discipline, on a member who disrespected leadership. That member was beaten so severely he suffered permanent brain damage. Another message discussed expansion plans in Tennessee and Kentucky. Federal agents raided Gangster Disciples operations in both states weeks later, seizing drugs and weapons. But here's what makes Larry Hoover different from other gang leaders in ADX. He's become a political cause. Activists argue that his 6 life sentences for drug conspiracy are excessive, that he's a political prisoner, that the government fears his influence on black communities. Celebrities have advocated for his release. Kanye West, Drake, Kim Kardashian met with President Trump about commuting his sentence. They point to Hoover's 21st Century Vote initiative, a prison reform proposal he drafted focusing on education and rehabilitation. They highlight his transformation narrative, that he renounced gang violence decades ago, that he's trying to redirect the gangster disciples toward legitimate community organizing. Federal prosecutors tell a different story. They present evidence that Hoover continues to profit from drug trafficking, that 21st Century Vote is a public relations scheme, that his calls for peace are contradicted by his coded orders for violence. In 2021, Hoover's legal team filed a compassionate release petition. He's elderly, has health issues. COVID-19 posed serious risks. The judge denied it, stated, "The defendant continues to pose a danger to the community. His ability to direct criminal activity from within the most secure prison in America demonstrates that release, even on medical grounds, would endanger public safety." So Larry Hoover remains in cell 30, 23 hours a day. No human contact, no phone calls, censored mail, limited visits. He's been in solitary confinement longer than some ADX inmates have been alive. And according to federal law enforcement, he's still in command, still communicating, still dangerous. His story exposes the fundamental paradox of ADX Florence. It can isolate a man's body, but not his mind, not his influence. Some prisoners are more than individuals. They're symbols, networks, systems. Lock them away, and the organization adapts, evolves, survives. But not every ADX inmate built empires or led organizations. Some were lone operators, individuals whose crimes were so disturbing, so incomprehensible, that they had to be separated from humanity itself. Men like the doctor who spent years slowly poisoning his patients to death, who smiled while they suffered, who got away with it for so long because nobody suspected a healer could be a serial killer. His name was Michael Swango, and his story proves that sometimes the most dangerous predators wear white coats. Michael Swango killed at least 4 people, probably 60, maybe more. Nobody knows the real number. He was a doctor. He had access to patients for over a decade across multiple hospitals in 3 countries, and he enjoyed watching them die. The pattern started in medical school. Ohio State University, 1983. Swango worked as a paramedic while studying. His colleagues noticed something strange. Patients seemed to code, go into cardiac arrest. More frequently, during his shifts. Nothing provable, just a statistical anomaly. He graduated, got residency positions. The deaths continued. Nurses whispered about the patients who mysteriously crashed when Dr. Swango treated them alone. But he was charming, competent, good with families. Nobody wanted to believe a doctor could be a murderer. In 1984, Swango worked at an ambulance service in Illinois. His co-workers got violently ill after he brought donuts to share. All 5 were hospitalized. Police found arsenic in the pastries. Swango was arrested, convicted of battery, served 2 years. After release, he changed his name, forged documents, got hired at hospitals in South Dakota and Virginia using fake credentials. The deaths resumed. A patient here, a patient there, always when Swango was alone with them, always attributed to natural causes or complications. He fled to Africa, worked at a mission hospital in Zimbabwe. Patients died there too. The hospital staff grew suspicious. Swango disappeared before they could investigate, returned to the United States. The FBI finally caught him in 1997 at Chicago O'Hare Airport. He was carrying false documents. During the investigation, they found his journal, pages describing how he felt when patients died, how he admired their suffering, how killing gave him pleasure. One entry read, "I love to hear the sweet, lovely screams of the young." Prosecutors built cases around 3 murders at a Veterans Affairs hospital in New York. Swango had injected patients with potassium or epinephrine, drugs that cause cardiac arrest. The victims were elderly, vulnerable, trusting. He pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, then said, "You betrayed the trust of your patients in the most hideous way imaginable." Swango sits in ADX Florence now, isolated, alone, no patients to poison, no power to take life. He's 70 years old. He'll die in that concrete cell, and when he does, his victim count will remain unknown, because nobody will ever identify all the patients who coded during his shifts, all the deaths attributed to natural causes, all the families who never knew their loved one was murdered by the doctor who smiled while signing the death certificate.